So it's like none of those people at the top think they're defending this country in any way, shape, or form. You can't get to those positions knowing or like being that naive. Now, if you're in it to win it and you're like, hey, I see America's weak spots and let's drive some wedges in here and pound real hard and take the blowtorch and like open this stuff up. They're like, get on the team. Yeah, that's what we're doing. And they've been doing it since they put the Office of Policy Coordination inside the CIA from State Department. So like the British directly put their hand, like one of those long rubber gloves, right through the State Department into the middle of the CIA. And that's been going on like longer than I've been alive. That's like all those 20th century coups. We weren't doing that on our own. We were being led on a leash by MI6 to be like, here's how we overthrow dictators. Here's Arbenz and here's Operation Ajax. And we'll get rid of Mossadegh and all these sort of things. It's a fascinating history of the Great Game.
Well, Rich, touching on the notion of the Great Game, there's because I know how incredulous you are. There's a interview that Michael Cesarian did with Keith Knight, and I know you're familiar with Keith Knight, and he was talking about, I think it was either the Declaration of Independence or something like that, where it's the writing on the paper is the word citizen, and under that, like they did an analysis, and it said that it used to say subject, and so that kind of alludes to more of like that mindset in that time. I'm just curious if you've been privy to that or looked into it at all, as far as like the evolution of the Great Game, because that's the veneer of freedom, but are we nearer to freedom? You know? Yeah,
I mean, I've always been interested in that milieu and the angles that come in there, right? Because you have May 1st, 1776, you got the Illuminati in Ingolstadt, May Day, right? May Day. It's our call for help. It's their call for power, right? May Day.
Yep.
So, and then, July 4th, 1776 is our famous day that year. So the ideas of breaking away from the empire, but not really breaking away from the empire. I mean, is that so different than Israel breaking free of the empire and then still being with the empire? Like when they bombed the King David Hotel in order to get their freedom from British mandate over Palestine, right? And then they still share intelligence services, and they're trained by MI6 and Mossad and CIA and MI6 have always worked together. They might have all worked together on 9/11. These sort of things might have happened. So there's an argument to be made. Do we ever leave the empire? Yeah. And if you look into, so I would say yes. And there's a ton of evidence to that effect, but it's a good question to start out with, because if we had not left the empire, the Eastern establishment families, the Boston Brahmins, they would have just held power. They wouldn't have been checked out of power and had to like change up their slave trading and such, opium trading and such. And they kind of had to put that underground. Right. And then the whole history of the British Empire's incursions to take America and put it back in the empire wouldn't have had to happen if we were already in the empire. Also, if our brand of free market capitalism and entrepreneurism was so bad, it wouldn't have taken them 100+ years to crush it after they installed the Federal Reserve System to drain it like a swimming pool. You could just look at the value of the dollar over time. It's the same graph as if I put a pump in your pool, consistently draining your wealth and leaving you nothing. That's the chart. Look at the value of the dollar compared to when it was back then. So it's obvious what they're doing. America was strong in many ways. Our education, our literacy, our common sense were superlative to theirs. And that's why they had to take so many decades, step by step, to dumb us down to the point where we think King of England and the royal family, that's interesting to Americans. We follow that. Not we, not me, but like people like go to the magazine stack when you're checking out someplace. It's like, oh, here's all the royal. It's like, that is antithetical. And the other thing will be our lawns. I mean, there was a time, it's like changing in the last 10 years, but there was a time all the neighborhoods had perfectly manicured lawns. Ethnic cleansing had gone on. There's only one type of grass left, and it's all the very perfect grass. It's perfectly mowed. That's a very British thing. They started doing that after they had slaves in India cut the grass with like knives and pieces of string to get them all the same height. America was about using your land to the nth degree for self-reliance, growing food, having a root cellar, having some animals, working with your neighbors.
Compound, right? I mean,
yes,
living in family units. Yeah.
And then they got us to change during after World War II. all the productive, like the highly produced foods, refined foods, all the easy bake, all this stuff, and then they slowly change the attitudes, values, and beliefs of Americans to not value family dinner times regularly, for instance. So no one gets together anymore. Everyone's got DoorDash, and everyone's just on Facebook. We've lost the substance and meaning of our human relationships through their process. So we have to take steps to put these back in place. Otherwise, they're not going to exist anymore.
And it's within like 4 generations of this destruction of that, right? 4 or 5 generations, I guess, and that destruction of that family unit, of that self-sustainment. Alex Jones made a point a couple weeks ago about the first, the Great Depression. I think there was like 22% of America was self-sustaining, and now less than 5% is self-sustaining. So
yeah, I mean, the numbers I hear usually associated were in the Great Depression, 10% were urban, 90% were rural, and now it's reversed. And now those who are rural still, yeah. And like, because of the big factory farming and stuff like that, the minute those distribution chains stop for even like a week or two, people start to starve. And then
this is why we keep having
they don't solve problems.
This is why we keep having Slim on the show, Rich.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we're really trying to hammer home the message that you need to develop a handshake relationship with the people who grow and produce the food that are close to you that you can't grow and produce in your own home on your own property. Because if you don't do that, then yes, you're what, 72 hours away from absolute chaos because there's no more food in the grocery store.
Yeah,
and
it's
crazy.
I was just gonna say it's like about a balancing act, right? So it's like, know your local food producers, and you're going to be healthier, also. But you'll also have a better chance of having food when other people don't. And then there's, storable foods, and then there's learning how to do some gardening, and then there's also learning how to forage. There's a ton of stuff right outside you can eat. Like if you read back to like the 1830s, like the Journal of Jedediah Smith and his travels across the West, you learn what the Native Americans were eating for themselves. Like flour made out of pumpkins, right? They're eating seeds, they're eating roots. They're eating like some of these places subsist on roots the whole time. They just eat roots, right? So it wasn't like a spectacular abundance of all these different foods necessarily, but they could figure out what to eat that's already there to stay alive so they didn't die. Most people today don't do that, and they wouldn't do that. They'd never consider eating some worms or any of the other things that are out there that you could eat to stay alive, because it's like, so their vanity will keep them from surviving, and that's not such a bad thing for, you got to weed out the weak ones, I guess. But
Look at
other people who would like to survive should know that you're allowed to. I'm inviting you to.
Food vanity, like you're saying, is built into the kids these days, right? Like if strawberry isn't a perfect looking strawberry, or
right.
I mean, just the amount of food that's wasted. I mean, there's been studies on that because it's imperfect, it doesn't look perfect, and they just toss it when it's
ugly food.
I think there's there might be a website, I think, still that does one of those monthly boxes or weekly boxes of ugly food, where they send you that ugly food that they get out of the dumpster, I think.
Yeah, I mean, heirloom tomatoes are ugly, and they're delicious. And if you don't learn that, then you're left with Soylent Green as people. That's what they're going to offer you.
And the factory farmers, what's crazy, these days, some of the factory farmers, they just know how to do that, right? I mean, they don't even know how to sustain off their own land other than cultivating those chickens or whatever Tyson's got them pushing through, or corn coming through. I mean, some of them couldn't live off the land themselves.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because Americans, by this time in our history, we could have been cultivated, right? Not programmed, but urged and encouraged in a direction that was healthy. To have, here's a couple acres, here's a couple animals, here's here's how to have good fence relations with your neighbors, right? Here's some shared community places you could grow hemp and bring it to the county center, and they'll put it through the decorticator and ship it off and cut you a check, right? Like you could encourage, hey, if you grow 5 acres of hemp on your property, we'll give you a big tax discount because we're going to use hemp to replace food, fiber, materials. We're going to get rid of gasoline. We're going to make all the plastics out of hemp. And we're just going to start having textile mills, and we're going to start being productive in the face of all this other stupidity, right? Set an example out there. Takes a little money to set it up, but Henry Ford had a plastic car back in the day. He hit with a sledgehammer, and they're like, we can't have that. That puts us all out of business. Well, they're putting us all out of business anyway. Maybe we should take back the good stuff that they took from us, put it back in our society. If you're growing hemp, you can make it into alcohol, which you could run all your farm equipment and your vehicles traditionally on that alcohol, making you independent. You can read Alcohol Can Be a Gas by David Bloom. You match that up with the Emperor of Hemp, Jack Herer's Bible on hemp, and you got a whole solution to make America independent again. And you don't have to bring back racism or any of this other stupid stuff when people are like, oh, you want America to be great again? I'm not talking about the Democrats, by the way. The whole Democratic Party has always been about slavery. The Republicans are the abolitionist party. The first abolitionist president was assassinated, and he wasn't assassinated by his own side. All right, so we can get into that and what banking families were involved with that as well, if you want to, because I'll go there. I got the receipts. I got the mots. So when you look at all these things in the totality, a lot of people, it's easy to get black-pilled, but that's a short attention span thing. If you have the time and you care, you can get to that white pill perspective where you're optimistic. You see that people have an incredible ability to learn. And if it wasn't a threat, they wouldn't have subverted it. And if we restore it, we can win this game. We already have the intellectual, moral, and ethical high ground. All we have to do is come up with a game plan that makes their bullshit game obsolete. And it's in the works.
It's a story, yeah. Once you can make it a point where it's a story that's easily disseminated to other people, then they're empowered by it, and they realize that freedom and liberty are the very things that they need to be able to escape the shell that they've been kept in so that they aren't able to breed. And that's kind of just the thing. We got to come to a point where we're able to make that symphony music so everybody can sing along to it.
It's like they hurled the worst fear that could ever be hurled, the fear to bring children into this world and to demoralize people to the point where they don't want to procreate. Like it's the beginning, first few minutes of idiocracy. Again, once again, smart people see, oh, there's danger. It's not responsible bringing people into this world. The other side is doing that. And they're going to leave people without freedom in the future if we don't fight to preserve these ideas that were hard won and blood fought after in the first place. So I'm glad that I'm able to contribute and I don't have to go out there on a battlefield and shoot the other side who has nothing to do with the other side of my argument. I think people around the world are oppressed almost uniformly, ironically enough, by a third party that they don't have local accountability to. So I have empathy and sympathy for 99.9% of my human colleagues here.